Do your emotions sometimes feel overwhelming or out of control? Ever wonder how your emotions are shaping your decisions, your relationships, and overall well-being? Whether they are serving you or holding you back? Well, understanding them and learning how to regulate our emotions is the key to emotional intelligence. Today, I'm joined by clinical psychologist Dr. Thoraiya Kanafani, who will help me unpack this important topic and provide insights and practical strategies to help us better manage our emotions so they work for us and not against us. Dr. Thoraiya has been working in the field of psychology for over 20 years. She has 2 master's degrees, one in educational psychology and another in counseling psychology, as well as a PhD in clinical psychology. She mainly works with couples and young adults between the ages of 18 to 45. Her expertise include, but is not limited to, personality disorders, relationship issues, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, addictions, learning disorders, trauma, and more. She currently works as a psychologist at HRIC Dubai, which stands for Human Relations Institute and Clinics. She has also taught in 7 universities across the UAE and is currently an assistant professor at Middlesex University in Dubai. I couldn't think of a better person to have this conversation with today, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. Dr. Thoraiya, thank you for being with me today. I'm so excited to talk to you about this topic. I think it's a much needed topic in today's modern world, so thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
I guess just to start, do you mind introducing yourself to the listeners, telling us a little bit about who you are, your clinical practice, and your area of expertise?
Sure. So, Dr. Thoraiya Kanafani, I'm a clinical psychologist and clinical director in Dubai. And I work mainly with individuals and couples, young adults between the ages of 18 till about 40, 45, on an array of different mental health difficulties. And I also work with organizations where I give them webinars, seminars, trainings on emotional intelligence, stress management, and things like that. So that's kind of my background.
Amazing. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you about emotional intelligence today. I'd love to do a deep dive on this topic on emotional well-being because I think a lot of us are struggling in this modern world to regulate our emotions, first and foremost, to even understand what they are, and then to manage them, to improve our intelligence and our literacy around emotions, and then ultimately to regulate them. Because I think our emotions and the way we feel are such a cornerstone in so many decisions that we take. I don't know if you agree with me, but like the simple habits in our day-to-day life, our relationships, our maybe professional decisions, it's kind of, a lot of it is based on how we feel. But many of us don't actually know what we feel. We don't understand our emotions. We don't know how to regulate them. We don't know how to improve them. So I'm so excited to do a deep dive just around emotional intelligence and just understanding what emotions are. So maybe we start there. What is an emotion?
So that's a really good question because it's a tough answer. I think so many of us are used to thinking of emotions as good or bad or right or wrong or negative or positive, whereas in reality, emotions are really a signal. They're signals that our body sends us to inform us of what's happening internally within us. And I think those signals are never good or bad or right or wrong. I think they're just extremely informative. And that's something that is very difficult for people to kind of hold on to because we tend to use emotions, certain emotions, from different connotations. So feeling anxious is a bad emotion or it's a negative emotion. Feeling anger is a negative emotion. These types or this language that we use is quite complex because it puts all of our emotions in this dichotomous nature, and it takes away from the actual purpose and the meaning behind having these emotions, which is our body's way of telling us something's going on.
So just to reiterate, it sounds like emotions have a functional purpose and our bodies are trying to communicate with us, trying to share something with us. But my question to you, when I come across like mental health practitioners, like for example, Dr. Daniel Amen, he's super famous, the brain doctor, psychiatrist. He says, don't believe every stupid thing you think, because not every thousands and thousands of thoughts that we have a day, not every single one of them serves a purpose, and some of them are really not serving. And then I've come across someone saying, I can't remember, it could be Dr. Daniel Amen or somebody else, don't believe every stupid thing you feel. Would you agree with that? Or would you say that every emotion that's showing up is a signal from the autonomic nervous system and we should kind of be in tune to our emotions?
I like the statement of don't believe it, but I wouldn't say don't attune to it. So one of the things that we say within the psychological realm is our feelings are not facts. So we might feel something, but it doesn't necessarily mean we should believe it or it's factual. So I might feel like a failure. It doesn't mean I'm a failure. I might feel like someone doesn't like me. It doesn't mean they don't like me. So the difference between believing our feelings and the reality that they exist are two different things. So should we give them the weight that we're experiencing them? No. We need to kind of like be a little bit more cognizant, more evaluative in nature when we talk about our emotions. At the same time, we don't want to just dismiss them and just be like they're all, incorrect either.
What is the relationship between our thinking mind, our thoughts, and our emotions?
That's a really good question. So you want to kind of think of the brain as a computer, right? And our body is the provider of all the ones and zeros. So it gives our brain all the data that is necessary for the brain to then evaluate whatever those ones and zeros mean. I mean, I know I'm reducing it to something so basic, not to say that computers are basic, but I am kind of reducing it. But in reality, what happens is that our body and through our senses, we gather all of this different information from around the world, right? As we have the stimuli that happens and then that gets coupled with all the experiences, our traumas, our mindsets, our coping strategies, our defense mechanisms. It then gets sucked into the brain where the brain is processing all of the stimuli with all of the experiences, the traumas, our previous nature, everything, our genetics, and then goes output. So that evaluation is part of our thinking process. That evaluation is part of our brain's ability to take all of that data and then give it an output. But that data is based on our senses, and our senses provide us information that contribute to our feelings and our emotions as well. So it's not like our thoughts and our feelings are different. They're actually very much intertwined. And we know this as, at least from a neuroscience perspective, the same message that we get from our body to give way to our amygdala and our limbic system, which processes our emotional information. It also, that same message goes to our prefrontal cortex, which processes our thoughts, our logic, our rational thinking, and all of that. So it's not like this information is separate from each other. They're quite intertwined.
So would you say, like, let's use your example on I feel like a failure, but I shouldn't necessarily believe that I am a failure. You're saying, thoughts and feelings are intertwined. We're receiving all this information and stimuli and generational, maybe conditioning or past conditioning, trauma, etc., that might get me to that place that might result in me feeling like a failure. I've now created that belief or that feeling, even though that's not actually a fact. So would you say one of the best ways to unpack or manage that emotion is to also go into the cognitive space of how that feeling came about? Is like, do you use your thinking mind basically to unpack a feeling and to like therapize
Not really.
it? No.
Not really, because then we move into what we call rationalizing or intellectualizing our emotions, right? So when you really think about it, the feelings, let's say the emotions that we get are based on our senses, right? And our internal experience. So for instance, and here's something that's really interesting, Adia. I'm gonna walk you through something with me, okay? So if my heart is racing and if I'm having like a bit of shortness of breath, if I feel like my hands are clammy, if I feel like I'm sweating, if my bladder's constricting and my stomach is kind of doing that butterfly, but a little weird thing on the inside, right? What would you think of if I say that?
You're anxious.
Very good. Now, here's what's really interesting is that these are the exact same symptoms my body would experience with excitement.
Right.
So why did we go to the anxiety? And most people will go to anxiety when I describe those symptoms. They'll be like, oh, I'm feeling anxious. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. Is it really? Like, what are we kind of processing in terms of like, this is anxiety? So our internal experience is then evaluated and given a value statement based on our past. But we cannot just take our past, change it, and then adjust because these experiences are going to still be there. So it's not like these emotions are going to change if I change the way that I think. That emotion, the physiological symptoms, all of these things are going to be there. I have to now give myself a new evaluation. I have to give myself a new input. I need to understand why I would jump to, let's say, anxiety versus excitement. Sure, no problem. I can understand that. But I don't need to think my way out of it. I need to process my way out of it. So I need to kind of just like sit with this emotion and be like, what are you actually telling me? Not, how do I change the way I feel? And we don't need to do that. So many people go into this moment of, I need to change being anxious or being angry. Well, I say, why? Let's just ask, why are you telling me this right now? Like my body, why are you telling me I'm angry right now? Like, why are you telling me I'm anxious right now? What are you trying to actually tell me that I'm ignoring? And so by understanding where this is coming from, I can dig a lot deeper into either maybe I do want to adjust it and change the way that I perceive it, or maybe I don't. Maybe I just need to kind of pay attention to it a little bit more. So if I have this feeling and now I take that feeling and I tell you, hey, I'm going to take all those symptoms that I just told you and I'm going to give it to you when you're standing in front of a major highway and you're about to cross. Yeah, okay, now we want you to have anxiety, right? Because that's going to stop you from crossing the road. I don't want you to have excitement at that moment. So that's why the emotion itself is not necessarily a good or bad or right or wrong. It's just that understanding why this is showing up for me in this moment is far more beneficial than kind of criticizing it or judging it on why it's showing up to begin with, or like the fact that it's showing up.
Fair enough. But what do we do about the emotions that are not serving us? Like the ones we don't necessarily, as you say, quote unquote, don't want to believe. So there are certain emotions that are here that are really there to serve us. I'm about to speak publicly. I'm about to cross a road. That elevated heart rate is going to serve me. I'm super focused. Like I'm, ready to just take this next thing super seriously. So I need that physiological response. But when my emotions are not serving me, or cognitively, I might have over-rationalized it, and I'm now understanding that I feel this way because of past experiences or because of conditioning, but I no longer want to feel this way, or I no longer believe this feeling. But the feeling still shows up. It still puts me in a paralyzed state, or it still makes me feel a certain way. I don't want to use the word negative, but maybe it puts me in a state of paralysis, or it doesn't serve me. I'm not being able to, live my best thriving self in that day or in those few hours. How do I then manage that? Because I can't think my way out of it. I can't really reframe my emotions the way I can maybe reframe my cognitive narratives, which is also still a hard thing to do. So how do I now unpack these feelings or manage emotions that are not serving?
Sure. So that's also a great question, because as I mentioned, when we talk about the fact that I don't want to judge my emotion, like kind of understand why it's there. Once it's there, and I can say to myself, okay, is this something that's good for me, and or not? Is it serving me or is it not serving? So if it's not serving me, now I got to check with my body. Am I in what we call hyperarousal, or am I in hypoarousal, or am I in my window of tolerance? Now, the difference between those three is very much tied to our biology and our nervous system. So hyperarousal is an overactive sympathetic nervous system. So it's our fight or flight kicking in. So this is where all the symptoms that I had mentioned would come up. And emotions like anger, frustration, agitation, irritability, anxiety, all of these kind of live up here. Then you have hypoarousal that's on the bottom. This is where lethargy, kind of like numbness, disconnection, dissociation, fatigue, just an absolute, I call it a blah, right? So it's just kind of like I'm chilling, but I'm disconnected as I'm chilling, right? In these two states, and this is an overactive parasympathetic nervous system. So in these two states, our nervous system is overactive, and these two states are not good for our body. So we have to regulate our body, which means we need to move into what we call our window of tolerance. Now, for that to happen, whatever the emotion that we're experiencing is, we need to actually say to ourselves, how do I regulate my nervous system? So if I'm up here at a hyperarousal, overactive sympathetic nervous system, then I need to calm my body down. To do that, I want to think of things like breathing exercises, calming breathing exercises, grounding techniques, meditation, mindfulness. These things are really good to kind of bring the body into what we call the window of tolerance. If I'm in hypoarousal, I actually want to do the quite opposite. So at this point, I want to do a breathing exercise, but something a little bit more excitatory. And I want to increase my heart rate. So getting up, walking around, maybe doing some physical exercise, jumping jacks, whatever it is, but to create that little like excess heart rate. So I'm moving back into my window of tolerance that way. So this is how we work through our emotions after not judging them and accepting while they're there. Just being like, okay, so this is not serving me, but it's not the emotion itself that's not serving me. It's the intensity of the emotion that's not serving me. So what I'm trying to do is regulate the intensity so that I can go on with my life and continue functioning with that emotion present. And we experience emotions all the time.
Mm-hmm. Can you maybe give us a clinical definition of what the window of tolerance is? I mean, it sounds self-explanatory, but I think maybe hearing it from you and really giving us the specifics so we can, I guess, assess if our emotions or our nervous system is within that window, it might be helpful for people to hear.
So I would say the best way for me to describe the window of tolerance is that my nervous system is not overactivated or underactivated. Right? So it's basically, I'm not on and very like, my emotions are not intense in either direction. So they're not intense in terms of like this numbness or depression or like extreme reduction in my mood and just like a blah, right? Or they're not intense in the other direction, which is like extreme anxiousness or like anger, frustration, that it's starting to affect. I can feel my blood is boiling. I'm screaming, I'm yelling. So when I'm not in those extremes, then my body is more often than not regulated, but I can feel it because I can monitor my heart rate. I can monitor my hands if they're clammy. I can monitor if my breathing is at its natural state, or is it up and like extremely, agitated, or if it's a lot lower than I would like, or a lot softer and a lot slower rate than I would like it to be. So all of these different things will indicate to me if I'm in my window of tolerance. Everybody's window of tolerance is going to be different. And my window of tolerance comes from my nervous system. It doesn't come from any kind of like external stimuli or external validation. It's literally my own nervous system. And it's when basically my body is doing everything that it's supposed to be doing naturally without intensity. If that were to be the perfect definition from me, that would be it.
Yeah, and I think you're also encouraging people to get to know their nervous systems, like tune in. A lot of us are on autopilot and we're going around from event to event or thing to thing, stress to stress, and we're not really tuning in. Like, where is my heart rate? Can I locate my breath? Am I breathing shallow? Is my heart rate elevated? Am I numb? Like you said, this blah state, but I'm just doing things because I have to. There's responsibilities that are being asked of me or that I have to, adhere to. And I'm just like marching on, but I'm not really here. I'm like not really in my day. I'm not really present. And maybe that's a type of blah. I once read that numbness is the presence of too many emotions, not the absence of emotions. And it's almost a state of overwhelm. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Because essentially what happens with the nervous system is when you're up on hyperarousal for too long, the body is exhausting itself, right? Because that's what's happening. Your nervous system is too activated because when you're in hyperarousal, your body's releasing cortisol and adrenaline. And cortisol in very small amounts is great for immunity, but when large amounts, it's actually not good for the immunity at all. So what ends up happening is that when you're up here for too long, the body's like, I'm out, I'm gone. And it drops into hypoarousal. And that's when your body is like, just leave me alone. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to do anything. And we all experience this in our day-to-day lives. Like imagine you have a day at work where you're just like, go, 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 go the whole day. And you're stressed out and you're taking care of a lot of different things. And by the time you get home, you're like, I'm done. Nobody speak to me. Nobody even look in my direction. I'm going to be on my phone. I'm going to doom scroll, Netflix, just episode after episode. This is that hyperarousal and hypoarousal shutdown.
Yeah. Would you say in your experience that we are experiencing a lot more dysregulation in our generation, in this modern world than we have previously before? Because I come across like Times articles or The Economist or wellness articles, and they're saying we are in an era of anxiety, and it's making like headlines and front cover news. And I would personally agree with it, but I'd love to ask you as a clinical psychologist, like in your experience, in your studies, would you say that we are in a state, and the modern world that we've created for ourselves is putting us in a state of constant, almost daily dysregulation?
It's a hard question to answer because of the fact that I don't believe our world is tougher in many ways than the previous generations. I think what has happened to us is that because we have had a far more convenient lifestyles, and we don't have to work as hard for certain things in certain ways, that we are now far more dysregulated because we don't necessarily have the coping strategies nor the tools that the previous generations did. This is not to say we don't have tough times. We have tough times in different ways, for sure. They had tough times in different ways. What I think is happening is because of the ease and the convenience in our life now, we have no longer developed or we haven't developed strongly a quality that I think is so necessary, which is patience. And I think because we're no longer as patient as the previous generations were, we want everything now in the way that we want it, how we want it at this moment. And so what ends up happening is that if I don't receive something in the way that I expect it to happen, and because I'm so used to things being very convenient for me, what ends up happening is that I get really frustrated really quickly, rather than learning that things happen at their own time, in their own way, at their own pace. And I think the previous generations were a lot better at being more mindful because things were slower. But also, I think they were a lot more patient, and they understood that things took time. Whereas now our generation and the generations after us are very much like, now, do this now.
There is a pace of this modern life that I think is impacting us mentally, psychologically, but at a nervous system level too, right? Like, I don't even think our parents or our grandparents were juggling as much as we do in 1 hour the way we are in 1 hour. And it's not even the responsibilities we have, because as you say, they had responsibilities too. They also had to put food on the table. They went through world wars, like all kinds of wars. So there were different types of stressors, but in our generation, there's a lot more maybe stimuli per hour. Like there are thousands of people's opinions on one click on my phone, on Instagram, or the news, the media is just way more available and faster and more than maybe previous generations that didn't have technology. I mean, the internet came up in our lifetime. I remember a childhood without the internet. So it really came like in a couple of decades in our lifetime. So but you mentioned something about strength. And so I would really love to segue into understanding how to build emotional resilience, which I think you're alluding to, that previous generations maybe had a different type of resilience that we don't have, or maybe is lacking, in this generation, because maybe we don't have patience or things are too convenient. So we've lost some type of resilience. Would you agree with that? And would you mind unpacking that for us?
I think it's such a layered topic, to be honest. I think a part of our resilience, yes, does come from the way the world is. Like there's just so much stimuli, so we're constantly overwhelmed, and our bodies and our nervous systems are overwhelmed. But also, I believe that we lack patience. I also believe we lack attention and focus. I mean, like you've seen it, and I you do podcasts, so you know about this way more than I do. But the reality is that when you look online, before we had YouTube videos, like full-on videos, 1 hour. Now we have YouTube shorts because they realize that people are not paying attention the way they used to. Some people do, some people don't. But the majority of people are looking for really quick things, 10-second videos, 20-second videos, whereas before we had the patience and the ability to pay attention to things for much longer. And that also gives you a sense of meditative and mindful kind of existence and presence. So I think that's another layer. But I also think that we're kind of getting to a place where we're not really promoting resilience. We're overcorrecting. So before, we used to ignore emotions. Like, if you feel something, suck it up because your emotions don't matter. Whereas now, I think we've also overcorrected, where everything is about emotions and everything is about emotional intelligence. And we even talk about emotional intelligence as it's the number one thing in business. No, it's not. Actually, research will show us that emotional intelligence should not exist in every industry. There are certain industries where emotional intelligence is crucial for someone to produce, to be good at their job, to actually get along with individuals, to be able to be productive. But there are also industries, and this is a disaster to do that. Like if somebody's working on my computer, I don't need them to tell me how I'm feeling, or I don't need them to care about what I'm feeling in this moment. I need them to finish working on my computer. Somebody's trying to sell me something. That's a little bit different. With sales, I'm looking for some form of a relationship there. With something, I mean, this is why I'm saying that we're overcorrecting. We went from, we don't care about your emotions, to now we care about every single emotion. We have to give it so much importance and never let it go. Like, no, we need to correct and be somewhere in the middle. We're like, yes, sometimes emotions are important, and sometimes emotions are not important. Sometimes you just gotta like not suck it up and move on, but you gotta push through. And that's, I think, one of the biggest reasons why our resilience is getting affected, because we're putting too much emphasis on like sitting and honoring and valuing your emotions, which is important. But I think we're taking it a bit far as well. And this is coming from a psychologist, so where emotions are everything for us, but still, we also got to move forward in life.
I love this answer. And I feel this intuitively as well, that we are overcorrecting and we are like sitting with our emotions a bit like we're giving it, there is such a thing as balance, and there is such a thing as, you know, being more emotionally intelligent and making room for this, but also, you know, getting on with it, as you're saying, and moving on and using your maybe physical intelligence, your body, like go like work, use your your IQ, your cognitive intelligence, like, you know, read a book or get back to work. Or there are other intelligences, there are different parts to us that we should also be kind of utilizing for overall well-being and health and resilience, and not just focusing so much on emotions. But I think you're right. There is this course correction from previous generations where it wasn't allowed. Boys don't cry, you know, be a good girl, this kind of stuff, or swallow your emotions to be a good wife, like all these kind of traditional kind of quotes and phrases that now there is a bit of a massive trauma response. And I see it in myself, in previous iterations of my journey, I would say, in health and wellness. And I see it in clients, and I see it with my friends, that sometimes it's like, maybe it's a bit too much. Maybe we just need to like get on with it. So I really do love that answer. Can we spend some time on that? Because I'd love to discuss how to build better resilience, how to just quote unquote make space for our emotions, but like get on with it as well, and find that good balance where we're not overdoing it, and finding, you know, some moderation here.
Well, I mean, the thing about resilience is it's quite tricky because it depends on the person, and it depends on their background, and depends on what they've already learned. So it's hard to kind of give a blanket statement on how to with resilience. But then you have your I mean, I guess I would call them like the basic coping mechanisms that people will talk about, which are things like, you know, journaling, giving yourself some time, finding a hobby, doing something that gives you a sense of meaning and purpose, creating this understanding of like whatever my emotions are, I understand them, I respect them, and at the same time still moving forward with the things that you do, and then rinse and repeat. And because resilience is something that's built over time, it's not an inherent skill that we're born with. It's a skill that you develop, just like confidence is. So with resilience, you have to give yourself an opportunity to say, okay, well, what am I missing at this moment? What am I feeling, at least within myself, that I'm not very resilient on or with? And so that's something I need to start thinking of. And I need to start saying to myself, okay, if I have the possibility of cognitively reframing what I'm supposed to think about this, that's great. That's one part of it. And then emotionally, I can recognize, okay, great. That's another part of it. What about like taking a second, pausing and breathing? Some people do like counting back from 10. Other people will do like some mindfulness techniques. Some people will do grounding techniques. Some people love to journal or sketch or draw. Some people like to scream into a pillow. Really, it just depends on the individual. But you have to find something for yourself. And I think prayer is a big one for a lot of people. Some people love to pray, and that connects them to the higher power that they believe in. And for them, that can be very resilient, right? It can be something that gives them a sense of hope, a sense of peace within themselves. So I think there's not much that I can say in terms of like the fixer for resilience, but what I can say is you have to try to find something that's good for you, that works for you, and then rinse and repeat, because that rinsing and repeating is really key to building resilience.
I have an idea, and this is something I personally have experienced, and it's something I share with my clients. So I'd love to know your thoughts. It's intentionally finding suffering. It's intentionally finding challenges. It's doing hard things. It's putting yourself out of your comfort zone. It can be as simple as, oh, I feel a little insecure in Pilates because I don't like the way I look. So put yourself in that class or find a new sport. Or it can be harder than that. I'm not saying anyone should find, an abusive situation and throw yourself into that kind of suffering. But a suffering could be like 1 month backpacking alone in a safe environment, or like completely away from your comforts. I did this. I've done this many times over the past like decades, and it was a way that I grew up in my childhood that kind of helped me build resilience. And in my adult life, I deliberately would seek it out. I would find experiences that were fun, but would also get me to really suffer, like hard hikes, really kind of uncomfortable accommodation, like, barely having a shower and like living out of a backpack, no luxuries around me, no car, and like putting myself in hard situations. That's just one example, but intentionally finding safe, but, examples where I could be out of my comfort zone and in a place where I'm slightly suffering, and it's like type 2 fun, where like when you look back, you're like, wow, that was an incredible experience, but I had to like endure some kind of hardship. For example, skinning up a mountain when it's, 0 degrees and it's snowing. It's hard. It's hard. Your mental and your emotional state is like screaming at you to get yourself out of this, but you're not in any state of like you're not unsafe. I'm with professionals and I'm going to have a fun time skiing down the other side of the mountain. But I'm putting myself through a suffering event. Would you agree that doing hard things and finding things for you that suit you, for me, it's like this outdoorsy stuff that can help someone build their mental or emotional resilience, is finding those discomforts?
I think it would. I would caveat that first with, you need to first learn how to regulate your nervous system before you do something like that. So when we're trying to throw people into the tougher things, right? Unless the person knows how to regulate their nervous system, they might have a panic attack, or they might freak out and then recluse and never try anything again. So I do not recommend that kind of full on what we call flooding. And it's really flooding of the nervous system. I don't recommend that. However, I do recommend it when they first learned how to regulate their nervous system. So if I recognize that my body's kind of reacting and I'm moving into my hyperarousal, and I already know how to do some breathing exercises or grounding techniques, or I know what works for me to calm my nervous system down, then absolutely, I would say go for it. Do the tough stuff, challenge yourself. If I don't know how to do that, then I would first encourage that everyone learn how to regulate their nervous system to, well, A, be able to identify what's happening to their nervous system, then regulate, and then do the challenging stuff.
Some of these examples are challenging for me because I've done this for so many years. So I can do that kind of level and I won't have a panic attack. It's something I recognize, even though it's still hard. But would you recommend, for example, I do have clients that have a lot of body image issues or their body dysmorphia. So going and wearing, yoga clothes and going to a Pilates class is really out of their comfort zone. So that's why I use that example. It's like finding suffering that is like a 6 out of 10 intensity for that person, not a 12 out of 10, which going, away to Brazil for a month backpacking might be a flood for that person, but we're looking
right. I still wouldn't do it at a 6 out of 10. To be honest, I still would no. Anything that puts your body above a 3, I say drop and then do a breathing exercise or do a regulating technique. Because if you're putting yourself so going back to this yoga thing, right? So let's say 6 out of 10. Great. But does she know how to regulate that 6? Can she bring herself back down to a 3? If she can, and I'm assuming it's a woman, but let's say she or he can, then great. Go for the 6 out of 10. But if they don't know how to move from a 6 to a 3, then absolutely not. I wouldn't even do that. I would never allow my clients to be out of their window of tolerance purposefully without them first learning how to regulate their nervous system, because that is by far the basic of any kind of interaction with the outside world. If our nervous system is dysregulated, then we're dysregulated. And if we're dysregulated, we can't think clearly. And if we can't think clearly, we don't behave clearly. So all of this is interconnected. So anytime my clients are feeling dysregulated, the first thing that I do, and I do this even in session, I say, whoa, you're out of your window of tolerance. Let's go back in. And then let's have this conversation. And so I work with my clients, and sometimes my clients, they're awesome. They're super cheeky as well. They'll look at me and be like, Dr. T, you're not in your window. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. You caught me. Thank you very much. Let me regulate myself. And so this is important. You'll start to realize between you and other people, when you're not in your window and when somebody else is not in their window, and when you stay in your window, then you can challenge yourself to tens and it'll be okay when you know how to regulate. But it doesn't matter if I am naturally at, let's say, a 2 or a 3, and then all of a sudden I've never had any kind of challenge in my life, that, as you said, that yoga class is not going to be a 6 for me. It's going to be a 10. And if I don't know how to regulate, it's going to give me that panic attack because I don't know how to deal with the emotions that are coming up, and I don't know what to do in that moment. So first step for me is always learning how to regulate your nervous system. Everything after that becomes a lot easier.
The reason I'm spending a lot of time on this is because there's a lot of information online that says, feel the fear and do it anyway, or step outside of your comfort zone. That's how you grow. That's how you build emotional and mental resilience. There's even a book that's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I think it's a psychologist who wrote it. And
yeah, I love that book. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. So it's like finding that fear, but I guess what you're saying is don't allow it to be past a 3, finding the challenges, but making sure that you're respectful to your nervous system at the same time, because challenging yourself is important, but not out of that window is what you're saying. So
right, because if I'm at a 3, let's say a 3 or a 4, and then I challenge myself to a 10, then the likelihood of me, because that experience is going to be too much for me to handle if I don't know how to regulate my nervous system, what's going to happen is the next time I get a challenge, even at a 5, I'm going to be like, I'm not touching that. I'm not feeling what I felt last time. So if someone wants to get to a 10, you can get to a 10. Just learn how to navigate your nervous system, because if you learn that, then every fear that you feel, you'll be able to navigate right through. But if I'm trying to jump leaps without giving myself a good foundation, then I'm going to end up falling back. And that fall is going to be so hard that it's going to take either a lot more emotional energy, or it's going to be impossible for me personally, internally, to say, why would I do that again? You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. No jumping leaps and no flooding. I'm with you on that. I guess it's just finding that challenge that's just a little bit out of your comfort zone, but as you say, keeping you regulated. Because when I look at past generations, or maybe they were walking around dysregulated all the time, but they were, I just feel like they were putting themselves through there was hardship that they were having to experience, and there was a resilience that was being built throughout that time. We could argue that they were also so dysregulated or so disconnected from their bodies that they were just marching on. But we were talking about the difference between this generation and the past, and there is a sense of resilience that's almost missing from this generation. So I was almost curious as to how can we build that? What can we do to be a little bit more resilient and find that middle ground?
I just want to add a little bit. I think just to kind of backtrack to what you were saying in terms of the previous generation, them having more resilience than us, or it's that they were so disconnected. I think it could be both, as we are kind of also today, right? So in terms of before, we don't even know if they were actually resilient or they had to suck it up and they didn't have a choice. And so they did what they had to do in order to survive. So in that case, is that truly resilience, or is that trauma, right? Or a trauma response? So we don't know. But what we do know is that they were able to do things. The problem now is that we are so stuck on what are you feeling that we forget that we still got to do things. Life is going on without us, and it's not waiting for us, nor is it asking for permission. So there, as I said, we need a middle ground somewhere. We've gone so far in overcorrecting that now we're losing the point of living, which is being and engaging.
I'd love to ask you what you think the definition of emotional intelligence is. You spoke about us, overcorrecting, but let's just break it down and understand what is emotional intelligence, when is it important, and how do we improve on it if it is important?
Yeah. So, it's interesting with emotional intelligence. As a psychologist, I learned about this when I first started, and I'm not going to go back too far to not reveal my age and feel old. But when we talked about emotional intelligence, when I first started studying, it was coined by two individuals. I'm trying to remember their names. Mayer, I think, and Salvoni or something like that. So I'm really bad with names. So these guys came up with a name in 1990, right? But it was not given much importance. And it wasn't until years later when Goleman came along and he's like, guys, pay attention. This is super important. Emotional intelligence. And of course you have in psychology, because we're very much a field based on philosophy, our beginnings came in with philosophy. So everybody's like this when it comes to any single topic. So now you have your Jordan Petersons that are like emotional intelligence doesn't exist. And then you have your Golemans who are like everything is emotional intelligence. And they're both kind of missing the point here. But anyway, the reality is that emotional intelligence has been defined as the ability to identify, understand, and manage your emotions as well as the emotions of people that are in front of you. So that's essentially what it is. Of course, we're not talking about you like controlling other people's emotions, but we're talking about management, right? Management's quite different. So within the idea of emotional intelligence, we look at self-awareness, we look at self-regulation, we look at a level of empathy, we look at motivation, and we look at social skills. And so these are the 5 main areas when we talk about emotional intelligence. And that emotional intelligence comes from this place of how well can you do this, right? So it's not so much that everybody's expected to do this at a specific level. It's just that everybody has a differing ability and capability. And so with emotional intelligence comes different skills. But the overall arching thematic nature of emotional intelligence is that you're able to name, understand, and manage your emotions, as well as naming and understanding at least another person's emotions and managing how their emotions are kind of shared with you.
Can you maybe unpack that a little bit more? When you say managing, you're saying not controlling, but managing someone else's emotions. I know what you mean conceptually, but I don't think I've ever heard that word being used or that concept being used when we define EQ, emotional intelligence, that I also have to manage the other person. I mean, being empathetic is being emotionally intelligent, which means that I am very considerate of the person in front of me. But yeah, can you unpack that for us, where I'm not controlling someone else's emotions, but I'm managing them, and that gives me high EQ? What does that mean exactly?
Yes. So it's a bit tricky because I would need an example. But okay, let's start here. So if I am having a conversation with a person and that person and I are in disagreement, and if I am in a position where I am able to name and recognize that I'm frustrated, right? And I'm managing my frustration, that I'm not yelling and screaming. However, I am being defensive and invalidating and not necessarily paying attention to what the person is saying, and I'm interrupting them, right? So this is my behavior. So now I'm not fully managing my emotion, and in turn, it's going to be very difficult for me to manage their emotion because my behavior is going to influence their behavior. It's not responsible for their behavior, but it is definitely going to influence their behavior as well. So if I'm being dismissive, if I'm being invalidated or invalidating, then the likelihood that the person in front of me speaking is going to get defensive, attacking, maybe offensive, depending on their emotional intelligence, right? I think it's hard to describe without a specific example, just because it's a bit tricky. But essentially, what you're thinking of when you're managing other people's emotions is, if I were to put myself in their position, I could see it from my perspective, not their perspective. So I have to be careful with that. So when I'm trying to manage someone else's emotions, it's not about me putting myself and thinking like them, because I can't think like them. It's about me understanding the emotion that they're experiencing. So if I notice that somebody is yelling at me, then I can tell there's anger there. But I also know that anger is a response to an emotion. It's not an actual emotion. It's a secondary emotion. So I know that anger is usually a response to pain or hurt, right? So in that moment, I can, by managing their emotion, I can be like, okay, I know what it's like to feel hurt and I know what it's like to feel pain. What would I need in this moment? Well, I would probably need someone to ask me, what do I need to help you regulate what's happening with you right now? So then that's what I do. So I'm not implementing my own needs, but I'm implementing something that I think would help, which is I'm asking a question, right? So this is how I manage. So my management comes from understanding the emotion behind the person, not the person and their behavior and things like that. That's not what I'm trying to manage.
It sounds like it's a tool of empathy, really, and of awareness and reflection, self-reflection, and the reflection of somebody else, like a type of empathy. It's a great example because maybe we should talk a little bit about disagreements, because conflict resolution and when we get into arguments or disagreements with others is, I think, one of the times that we feel the worst and people really struggle with. It really impacts our mental and emotional well-being, and people don't have the tools for. And it's actually a time where we're so heightened we can't control our emotions. So when we're very frustrated, very angry, that's, I think, one of the best examples of where we lose control. We're more likely to be in control of ourselves and our emotions and our speech and the words that we choose when we're regulated and when we're happy or when we're dealing with a small stress. But when we're in a disagreement with a loved one or something is getting fiery or heated, that's when we lose control. And I think that's where people, maybe it's a good example to unpack and maybe give some tips for people listening, because I think that's where people lose themselves a little bit. Would you agree?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I wouldn't even need to give you an opinion. I can show you with facts. So essentially, we have enough brain scans that will tell us that this part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, okay, so this part of the brain is responsible for impulse control, logic, rational thought, and executive functioning, amongst other things. So this part of the brain, its electrical activity actually reduces significantly when our limbic system is very activated. So our limbic system is where we process emotions. So if I'm angry, the ability for me to think logically does not exist. So when people say that to me, I always find that funny. They're like, I can think logically when I'm angry. And I'm like, well, no, you can't, clearly. So what we want to do is we need to regulate our nervous system before we can, have a conversation, or we need to at least let this turn back on again, right? Not that it's like completely off, but it's off enough for us to not be in a state where we are regulated. So in general, because I work with a lot of couples. So with conflict resolution, couples are the best people to work with, because you learn so much about conflict when it comes to couples, because it's where you're going to be the most activated, because you love that person so much or you hate that person so much. But there's like, this is the best way to learn how to really work through conflict resolution. In those moments, I do not allow people to speak in our sessions if they're out of window of tolerance. So as soon as they start to get angry, I'm like, whoa, calm down. Let's do this again. I don't say calm down. That will piss off anybody if I say that, but I'll tell them, okay, you're out of your window. Let's regulate. So they regulate, and then we continue the conversation. If somebody else is out of their window, I say, okay, let's regulate before we have this conversation. And the reason for that is because you can always say, okay, I'm not regulated, I'm going to walk away. Okay, you can walk away, but if you're not regulating while you've walked away, you're going to come back and you're going to be just as angry. So the whole purpose of being able to manage your thought process, to think logically, clearly, to say the things that you actually want to say versus the things that you're saying because you're trying to hurt the other person or because you're getting defensive, that can only happen when you're in your window of tolerance. If you're not in your window of tolerance, you will not be able to have these conversations in regulated manners.
So everyone listening, before conflict, we want to regulate. We want to breathe, ground, meditate, cold, hot shower, whatever works for you. We need to regulate before we have a disagreement, or if we've had a disagreement, before we get into the conversation about the disagreement, we need to be regulated so we say what we mean and we can communicate effectively. You mentioned naming the emotion, which is something I'd love to talk to you about, which is emotional literacy, which is expanding our understanding of emotions. I come across a lot of people, unfortunately, especially men, maybe more in the Middle East, but who aren't given maybe societally the opportunity to emotionally, quote unquote, grow or allow their emotions to be a little bit more present. And so what I get from men, I don't want to categorize. What I get from people who haven't done this work is they'll use very reductionist words to describe their emotions. Things like happy, sad, bad, good, angry, maybe depressed, lonely, jealous, and one or frustrated, and one or two other things. And we have an array of emotions, not just good, bad, happy, sad, right? And so when we allow someone either to feel their emotions and to connect with them, and then to develop this intelligence, maybe you would consider this as part of improving your emotional intelligence, then we can name the emotion more effectively, correct? And then we can have better communication with the people in our life. How would you define emotional literacy, and how important is it in our day-to-day life or in relationship with others?
It's extremely important. So if you've ever been a client of mine, or if you've ever been a student of mine, I talk about the feeling wheel. And I say this is a wheel that everybody should have, almost like a screensaver on their phone. The reality is exactly what you had mentioned earlier, which is we go to these very reductionist emotions that people use, or things like good, bad, sad, scared, angry, right? Whereas when you look at the feeling wheel, it's insane the amount of words that we have to describe the different emotions. So there are things like, I feel rejected, I feel isolated, I feel disappointed, I feel betrayed, I feel overwhelmed, I feel powerless, I feel helpless, I feel hopeless. I mean, I can do this for days. And in reality, and that's just in English. If you choose other languages, like for instance in Hindi, they have words that don't exist in English, and in English they don't exist in Hindi. In Arabic, it's the same idea. And in Arabic, there is no word for the English word of vulnerable, but in Arabic we have other words that in English don't exist. So it's so beautiful to see the amount of words that we have for emotions, but we bring them down to size to like 6, maybe 7 words that we'll use. So being able to recognize and identify accurately, I think that's the most important word, to accurately, and then label the emotions, it gives us so much more information as to actually what's happening. So I tell my clients, you move away from anything that has to do with angry. So angry, frustrated, irritated, agitated, get rid of these words. If you want to really tap into what's happening, go into, and a part of the feeling wheel that I have, it's the blue zone. And I say, go into sadness. Let's see what's there. And then they get into it and they go, actually, I'm feeling very isolated, or I'm feeling very vulnerable. I'm feeling very fragile. And I'm like, okay, now let's dig into that. And the anger was a result of this emotion, but because this emotion feels very vulnerable and exposing, I don't like this because this makes me feel helpless, right? So I want an emotion that helps me feel more in control. Anger, that's the one I'm gonna go for, right? So this is why the labeling, the emotional literacy is so important, because it gives us an opportunity to truly tap into what's really going on and what am I actually experiencing, and that way it'll help me work through it.
Because vulnerable is so much more of a powerful or profound word than I feel bad, And as you say, there's more information there. And when there's more information, I guess, we can tap into the need that needs to be met, right? The unmet need, whether
Right.
it's in our own lives or in relationship with somebody else. So it's just a more profound experience. And I guess, as you're saying, it contributes to our emotional intelligence and can improve our relationship with ourselves, because sometimes we feel this way and it has nothing to do with other people, but also our relationship with others. You mentioned earlier that we all have coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms that we've built in our psyche, in our lives. Could you maybe help us understand what those are, and what are the different types of mechanisms that we have kind of built into our psyche? That are they, I guess they're part of a survival mechanism or a self-protective mechanism that might not always be serving?
Yeah, so actually a lot of people interchange the words coping mechanism and defense mechanism, right? And I mean, as psychologists, we don't like to do that at all. We like to make sure that there's a proper differentiation between the two. And the reason for that is because a defense mechanism essentially is a protective mechanism, whereas a coping strategy is something that we're using in order to work through whatever it is that we're experiencing, right? So a defense mechanism could be something like denial, for instance. And most people, again, will go back to the cognitive connotation of, oh, a defense mechanism is a bad thing. No, it's not. Everything in moderation is actually pretty okay. So for instance, even the word denial, everybody's like, oh my God, she's in denial or he's in denial. That's problematic. No. Let's say there's grief. Denial is understandable, right? So we always have to remember that defense mechanisms are not good or bad or right or wrong. It's just context makes a very big difference. So something like, for instance, denial, something like projection, something like rationalization, intellectualization. I'm just giving you like quick examples of different defense mechanisms. These are used as a way to protect us from emotions that we're finding too overwhelming to deal with and to work through. And so we're kind of pushing them away. And we use these mechanisms as a way to do so. Now, with coping strategies, I'm able to identify my emotion and I'm going to work through them through some of these coping strategies. So coping strategy, for instance, can be journaling. It could be talking to a friend. It could be doing some meditation. It could be a mindful art. It could be boxing. Whatever it is for me, it's something that allows me to work through my emotions. So I'm not trying to set them aside. I'm not trying to either consciously or subconsciously set my unwanted or discomforting emotions aside. I'm actually working through that.
We talked a lot about emotional literacy, high EQ, and I'd love to ask you, what are some behaviors that indicate low EQ? And what do I do when I'm kind of in a relationship with, and I don't mean romantically, it could be someone at work, it could be a friend, it could be an acquaintance, when I'm in an interaction with someone who's got low EQ, and what does it look like?
It's tricky because it'll look like different things for different people, but I would definitely say first and foremost thing that you'll notice is that they have difficulty managing their emotions, regardless what that emotion is. It could be what people would normally consider positive emotions or negative emotions, right? You'll also see a lack of empathy amongst some of these individuals as well. You'll see poor social skills, like an inability to communicate with others, an inability to deal with conflict with others. There's a lot of stress in conflict. So they're either conflict avoidant, or they end up like engaging in a lot of conflict, but they don't really know how to engage in a either professional or I would say mature manner, and not mature from like a judgmental perspective, but mature from like an emotionally regulated perspective. Also, they're not really good at handling any kind of criticism. And by criticism, I don't mean that the person is actually criticizing. It can be constructive feedback, and that person is unable to handle that type of information. So it really depends on the person, but those are I would say the high level behaviors that you would normally notice among somebody who has low EQ.
It sounds about right. And I think everyone has come across behaviors like that. So do you have any advice for us when we do come across someone who is either, super avoidant when it comes to conflict, or doesn't know how to manage conflict and just goes all in and is very aggressive? When we're in an interaction with somebody like this, whether much older than us or much younger than us sometimes, like, what do we do?
Okay, so just because you mentioned much older, I'm going to caveat
that's
this.
hard, right? There's a respect
Yeah,
thing.
because I'm going to caveat this with, if you come from a collectivist society, please take my words with a grain of salt, because families are very complex. And I'm not saying that you should do this in this way with families, because this is something I work so much with with my clients that come from collectivist societies. I say, be very careful how you do this with family versus how you do this with everybody else. And the thing that I'm referring to is boundary setting. So this is like one of my favorite words on this planet, which is boundaries. And the reason why is because it usually is a great resolution to a lot of difficulties that can come up in your life when you set healthy boundaries. Now, boundaries is a topic in and of itself that we can probably talk about for like another 3 hours, but I'm not going to do that. What I am going to say is boundary setting is usually a great way to help dealing with individuals who have low EQ. However, asterisk there, please do not apply this with your mother and your father, especially if your mother and your father come from collectivist society. So that is a different caveat for a different day.
Define what collectivist society is.
So it's usually a society that puts the collective, so the family, the society, the social structure, the religious structure, above the individualistic need and desire and want. And so you don't think of yourself first, you think of the collective. And usually that also comes with a hierarchy. So you do things for the elders before you do things for yourself. There's a lot of not responsibility, expectation. There's a lot of sometimes unrealistic expectations, but there are a lot of shoulds and have tos that govern your life from a collectivist perspective.
It sounds like, Arab culture, Middle Eastern culture. And it's part of the reason why I asked that question, because we have a very high regard for our elders. There is a hierarchical society. I think Asian cultures have this too, Japanese,
Right.
Indian cultures. So it's not something that we're not familiar with. I think this audience is predominantly from like the Middle East and Eastern. So that's why I asked the question, because it's very different when you're dealing with someone who has low EQ and it's in the office versus a mom or dad or a grandfather, like
Right.
an uncle or something.
Right.
Yeah, so, but boundaries, I guess, in general, is a tip. And I guess also, would you say like regulating yourself and creating a kind of virtual boundary where you're not like inhaling or consuming that energy, right?
Yes,
Finding a way
100%.
yeah.
That would be an internal boundary that you're creating, right? And so there are the external boundaries that we have, but there's also the internal ones. And the internal ones come from this perspective of like, I'm not going to allow this person or this person's energy to kind of invade what is happening with me internally. So I'm going to do everything that I can to regulate myself so I can remain calm and, everybody stays in a peaceful place right now.
Yeah. Before we close, Dr. Thoraiya, do you mind just sharing a few tips or last kind of pieces of advice or nuggets of wisdom for anybody who is trying to manage their emotions or increase their emotional intelligence? Is there any resources or books you can maybe recommend just for people listening who want to take this further?
Sure. I would start off with learn your nervous system. Learn about your nervous system. Understand what hypoarousal is, what hyperarousal is. Understand the window of tolerance. There's a really good book called I think it's Widening the Window. If I'm not mistaken, I'm really bad with names again. But that book, or Widen the Window, it's a really great book that talks about all of these different things and the physiological nature of emotions, of thoughts, and things like that. So that's a great place to start. Also, learn about emotions, understand what they are. Look at the feeling wheel, be able to identify what different emotions exist out there. Also, find something that is meditative, whatever that is. That could be journaling, that could be painting, that could be throwing things at a wall, not at your house, but like, at a smash room or something, or it could be boxing, or it could be screaming and singing in the car. I mean, whatever it is, but just something that's regulating for you. It could be meditating or praying and things like that. So that's really important. Learning how to set boundaries is very important as well. I would say set daily habits that give you an opportunity to tap into your body, to understand and to learn. Be curious when you talk about yourself and be curious when you think about others. So for instance, if I'm with someone and they're like, frustrated and they're quite agitated, I want to be curious before I think about taking it personally, or I think about what are they doing and who do they think they're talking to. Instead of engaging in that, I want to be curious, like, what's going on with this person? And sometimes I'll ask those questions, like, what's going on with you? This isn't usually how you would, address me, or this is not usually how we would have this conversation. What's going on? So I think that curiosity piece internally, but also the curiosity externally, helps with not only increasing a level of empathy, but also increasing the level of understanding and awareness of other people's emotions as well as yourselves.
I love that. They say that you can't be curious and judgmental at the same time. And the whole point of this is to avoid judgment. The this is good, this is bad, is just getting curious to understand, to deepen your knowledge, to deepen your understanding of what's happening here, either with yourself or with another person or your interaction with that person. So I love that you say that. Where can people find you if they'd like to talk to you, if they'd like to book you for, I know you do sometimes public speaking, or if they'd like to work with you?
Well, two places are the easiest. Instagram is usually the fastest. So just Dr.Thoraiya. My name is very complex. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to put my handles. You will. Okay. There's that, or at the center HRIC in Dubai.
Great. Thank you so much for being with me today and for sharing all that you did. I'm really grateful for your time, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Please share with family and friends that you feel could benefit from this episode, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a rating and review to support the show. Check out the links below for more information about my guests and where to find them. And make sure you're following me on Instagram at wholesome_practice to learn more about what I do. I appreciate you being here, and see you on the next one. This podcast is for educational purposes only and should never replace the advice of your doctor or physician. Always consult a medical professional before making any changes or adding anything new to your diet, lifestyle, or medication protocol.